ชยาสุภวณิชนะคะเป็นหัวหน้าฝ่ายนิทรรศการแล้วก็เป็นคิวเรเตอร์ของหอศิลป์ก็ขอต้อนรับทุกคนขอบคุณมากที่สละเวลามาเช้าวันนี้ก็โปรเจกต์นี้เป็นโปรเจกต์ที่เราทำร่วมกันมาใช้เวลาแปลนมาสักพักหนึ่งกว่าจะออกมาได้ขนาดนี้ก็จะขอบคุณทาง Foster and Partners แล้วก็ทางคุณปิ๊กที่เป็นผู้ร่วมงานกันมาตั้งแต่ต้นแล้วก็สำหรับหอศิลป์เองเนี่ยคือนอกเหนือจากเราเน้นทางด้าน Visual Art แล้วเนี่ยเราคิดว่างาน Creative อื่นๆที่สามารถเข้ามาเกื้อหนุนกันให้มองไม่ว่าจะศิลปะก็ดีหรือสถาปัตย์หรือว่างานแขนงใดก็ดีให้ชัดขึ้นเนี่ยเป็นก้าวจากตรงนี้ไปข้างหน้าแล้วก็ปีหน้าเนี่ยเราอยากที่จะโฟกัสในเรื่องของเมืองมากขึ้นไม่ใช่ในแง่สังคมแต่ว่าเป็นวิชั่นว่าเมืองแบบไหนที่เราอยากจะอยู่กันในอนาคตก็หวังว่าจุดเริ่มต้นของ Foster งานของ Foster ครั้งนี้เนี่ยจะเป็นการจุดประกายเล็กๆสำหรับคนทั่วไปก็ดีแล้วก็จากสถาปนิกก็ดีให้ลองคิดในมุมที่สามารถเปลี่ยนอะไรแม้แต่จากจุดเล็กๆได้มากขึ้นก็เดี๋ยวยังไงจะขอโยนไมค์ให้ทางคุณสันพลผู้ซึ่งเป็น Associate ของ Foster มาเป็นเวลา10กว่าปีใช่ไหมคะค่ะก็เดี๋ยวทางคุณสันพลจะรับช่วงต่อนะคะขอบคุณมาก
ครับก็ขอบคุณทาง BACC นะครับที่ร่วมสนับสนุนกิจกรรมครั้งนี้ขึ้นมาก็ผมสันพลนะครับเป็นสถาปนิกจากบริษัท Foster and Partners การบรรยายวันนี้ก็เป็นกิจกรรมแรกในซีรีส์ของเราซึ่งเป็นกิจกรรมส่งเสริมการศึกษาที่เป็นของงานนิทรรศการ The Art of Architecture นะครับที่เราแสดงอยู่ข้างบนชั้น 7วันนี้คุณเดวิดเนลสันเป็นให้เกียรติมาเป็นผู้เลคเชอร์เรานะครับในเรื่องของ Integrated Design หรือว่าวิธีการออกแบบบูรณาการของออฟฟิศเราซึ่งคุณเดวิดก็ทำงานร่วมกับนอร์มันเป็นคนหนึ่งนะที่ร่วมทำกับนอร์มันมาตั้งแต่เริ่มต้นเลยนะของการเปิดบริษัทนะครับต่อไปเดี๋ยวผมขอเชิญคุณปิ๊กซึ่งจะมาเป็นโมเดเลเตอร์ของการบรรยายครั้งนี้ขึ้นมารับช่วงต่อนะครับ
ขอบคุณค่ะคุณสันพลก็อันดับแรกเลยเดี๋ยวปิ๊กจะต้องสวิตช์เป็นภาษาอังกฤษด้วยนะคะเพราะว่าเรามีคนต่างชาตินะคะก็ให้วันนี้บรรยากาศของเราเนี่ยแบบเป็นกันเองนะคะแล้วก็ปิ๊กอยากให้ได้เริ่มฟังแบบสร้างแรงบันดาลใจว่าเพราะปิ๊กรู้ว่าวันนี้หลายๆท่านก็ไม่ได้เป็นสถาปนิกนะคะบางท่านก็ทำธุรกิจอื่นลองดูซิว่าเราจะทำอะไรสำหรับบ้านเมืองเราได้บ้างหรือว่าบางทีคุณอาจจะเริ่มคิดแล้วก็ได้ว่าที่เราได้ยินเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการออกแบบยั่งยืนเนี่ยสำหรับคุณมันจะเป็นยังไงนะคะแล้วก็อยากให้มันมีความอิสระที่จะพูดคุยหรือถามคำถามได้นะคะ so I welcome for everyone here to join us and what we're gonna run up here will be more kind of friendly talk and discussion after David present of his work. However, we'll operate up here in English so that anyone that does not speak Thai will be able to engage your interest and your question with us. And for a Thai audience here, we have a translator as well. Okay, so I will welcome Kun David for starting the lecture. And also the panel of the discussion will be Pitam, Kun Pongpon Subantat, and Kun Yanyong Bulong Naka. Please illustrate with us as well.
Okay, this one. Shall I start? Yeah. Very good. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming on a Saturday morning like this. It's I much appreciate it. It would seem that architecture is a fairly frenetic and intensive experience, and we're always looking towards the future. And when there's an opportunity to put together something like the exhibition upstairs, it forces you to think about the past as well as where the future's going. And it's interesting to, when you do that and you see where you are today, you sometimes wonder, how did you end up there? Why did we end up doing architecture in the first place? And also, why did we end up doing it the way that we've done it? And I think with a group of people like this is about 800 of our 1,200 staff around the world. These are the ones based in London. You realise that this has taken us 45 years to get to this size. You don't really do that overnight. It's something that has to grow through the long term. And there's never an intention to grow. We've been very lucky. Everybody's worked very hard, and we've had experiences and then more experiences and more opportunities. And that's one of the reasons why we've grown to the scale that we are. But some of the values and some of the processes that we started out with in the very beginning are still very much in evidence. And it's interesting to step backwards in time. This is rather a long way. This photograph was taken of Foster and Partners, called Foster Associates, at that point in time in about 1980, in the early 80s. And I think when I joined there was about 15 of us, and the practice had already been running for 9 years. And here we were about to embark on our biggest project, the thing that changed us enormously, the Hong Kong Bank. So we were growing past the magical 30 number people, and moving forward to the future. What's interesting about this photograph is that only half of these people in this image are architects. Only half of them. And in any organisation, you need things like administration and people to run things, to run the business. But only half being architects is interesting. There are sort of industrial designers here, various specialists. But very importantly, there are 5 or 6 engineers. And at the time, back in the 80s, when we were doing our work, engineering was always a very integrated part of our working methodology. And here, this is mainly mechanical and electrical engineers. But it's something that we've always had an affinity for. And having that engineering, not emphasis, but involvement right from the very early days has helped us in later eras do things like the bridge projects and other things that are beyond the scale of normal architecture and go into big-scale infrastructure. And then if we go back another period, this is now back when Norman was a student. That's him in there, second from the left, standing next to his friend called Richard Rogers. And they, like some of you, were architectural students back here. This is the early 1960s, and this is Yale. And some of the things, when you look back and you realise that the collaborative way of working here they all are, Richard and Norman and 2 other friends, all embarking on a master plan project. And a lot of education today in architecture is about the sort of the individual, the single person, doing a design, and you're encouraged to think that way. But right here, and in America at this point in time, the idea of collaborative working was something that was very strong and has become a key part of the work today. So here we are in the office many years later with architects and urban planning people developing a master plan in exactly the same way, collaborative way as before. So collaboration for us is a key component. And the idea of having different disciplines involved right from the very beginning. When you design a building, there's engineering input, there's cost input, there's sort of specialists that are involved right from the very beginning. This from the 1970s, the early 1970s, with Buckminster Fuller here. There was a project, unfortunately it never really materialised, but this is probably the first meeting on the project. And right at the first meeting, there are 2 architects, Norman and Michael Hopkins, and there is a structural engineer, there's a cost consultant, and a graphics person, right at the very beginning. So at the origins of what we do, it's always been not only collaborative, but also bringing in right from the very first opening concepts, specialist people to actually work together and collaborate on things. And that, through all the years, has advanced dramatically. And we now have an incredible widespread of specialist input. You see here, we have aerospace engineers, we have material scientists, we have architects, we have people that write software that are involved with building physics. All these things are actually there as a sort of a product, partially, of being able to get to the scale that we are. If you get to be that big, you can have research built into the practice in the way that we have. And this is really changing the way we do architecture. And it's incredibly exciting in the last 2 years or so how we've reached a critical mass in some of these support groups, and it literally is altering the way that we design buildings. Now, the title of integrated design can be interpreted by different people in different ways, and obviously what I've tried to explain is that there's an integrated thought process that actually leads to the development of a project. Before any design started, it's a thinking about everything at the same time moment to go forward with. But there's also the potential for physical integration. So components of a building can be brought together in some new ways. And I'd like to use our office here to try and explain what I mean by that. This is in our office in London looking out over the Thames. And you can see there's a concrete column there holding up the roof. That's all it's doing, it's holding up the roof. A little bit of in front of it are those dark grey pieces of steel called mullions that hold up the weight of the glass and all the wind loads that actually hit the glass. And they are then transmitted through the floor back into that column. Now this is really a kind of layered architecture. It's not about integration, it's about separation. You separate out the individual pieces, which a lot of the history of the architecture, particularly in modern times, and the way we practice it exists today. But if we move on to another project, this is McLaren, also in Britain, their headquarters. With this project, they wanted us to sort of try and design the building more in the way that they design cars or aerospace designs aircraft. And it gave us an opportunity to move a little bit further towards integration. And what they meant by that is that if you look at what they do at the scale that they do, this is a racing car. It shows the connection of the wheels to the body with these sort of carbon fibre struts that hold it all on. Those elements are actually doing several things. Of course, they're holding the wheel onto the car as one thing that they're doing. They're also part of the aerodynamics. They're shaped in a way to encourage airflow to go over them. Through them, the brakes are controlled. Also, there's a mass of cabling inside these pieces that actually lead to sensors inside the wheel to give you information about the brakes and about the tyre performance that goes back into the car and transmitted while the race is on back to Woking in Britain, where there's an army of engineers looking at the data, trying to give advice to the driver to go around. But the point is here, this is one element, one piece that's doing several jobs. And that doesn't sort of happen in architecture in quite the same way, because we separate things out. So here, a very similar image, looking inside, looking through at the exterior wall to the outside. Superficially very similar. The column is holding up the roof, but in this instance, it's also the rainwater pipe. So the water from the roof, when it rains, goes down through the center of the structure and connects into the lake. Those horizontal pieces are called wind blades, and they take the load of the wind and translate it directly back into the column, which means we don't have to have those heavy vertical pieces that we had in our office, which, given that there is a lake in front of you, it's very beautiful, allows you to actually sort of get a long distance view of the lake without the interruption of all these pieces of metalwork. But the lake itself is also integrated. It is very beautiful, but it's also part of the cooling system for the building, particularly the wind tunnel. So water, hot water, is produced into the lake. That generates algae, it generates growth in the water. So we put fish in the water. The fish grow because it's hot and a lot of food gets produced, and then the birds arrived, and the birds arrive to eat the fish. So we have McLaren here doing Formula One racing, but also running an ecosystem which I don't think they planned on when we began. But it shows another interpretation of the way that we think about integration. And then to go maybe to the next step. This is another project. This is in Germany. This is the Berlin Free University, where we're trying to bring all of those things together, the structure, the cladding, the daylight, the mechanical, electrical engineering, all into one series of components. So that's the outside. The inside has this translucent layer. It's a library for the university, a new building set within the restored old. And you can see here in this section, really, that into the structure, which holds the cladding, we allow air in when cool air comes in, and we allow hot air out, and actually use the whole building and the whole envelope to be part of the performance, a key performance of the building, as well as producing a very beautiful library space, something that's calm and tranquil. You can see little bits of glimpse out, but this warm, very natural light is very powerful and very inducive to study. It's proved so popular they've had to actually stop other universities sending their students here because it was getting rather full as of about 11 o'clock in the morning. So integrating things together from a performance point of view is something that as a practice we're doing and always have been doing from a process standpoint, but more and more we're getting interested in just how far can we develop literal physical integration into the components. And when I tell you that one aspect of sustainability is obviously to do with materials and the way that we live. And if you imagine that if we all lived like they do in America, we would need 5 planets of materials and resources to live like that. And if we all moved to Europe and joined us, we'd need 3 planets to live like we all do in Europe. You realise to actually do more with less, to think about design and to think about integration and making the investment in one piece of material do more than one job. That's, as an ideal and an objective, seems to us to be particularly attractive, which is one of the reasons why we're pursuing it. So all of these things come together. And of course, with an exhibition upstairs, it's wonderful to see the end product, but it's very hard to get a feeling for how that actually happens. So one of the other specialist groups we have in the office is a film unit, which actually produces films for projects for our clients to explain things for exhibitions. Some of the films you see up here were made by our own people in-house. And they put together this little film, which I'll talk over, which gives you something or an insight about how we work. And clearly, sketching, producing images in a very early stage is something that's very important. And linking it with research and analysis, there's a lot on an urban scale, but also on an individual scale. Thinking about city planning, trying to develop resources for getting information, working very closely with the people who are going to occupy the building, analysing their needs, making suggestions about how they might interconnect and how they might work. Back to the sketching, thinking about what it might be, using those sketches as the beginnings of design ideas to develop and to draw through. Always sketching is a great vehicle to how you think and how you work. Models are absolutely crucial to our process at all different scales. 3D printing, obviously now a very, very key element to it. And working with specialists, we brought engineers back into the office in order to work together on individual buildings and structures. And just to be sure that we get internally, right from the day one, the proper responses to how we can approach the design of buildings. Regular discussions, regular events where we work together. Software development here again on urban planning, looking at cities, heat calculations, shadow paths, actually looking here at actually how we would naturally ventilate very deep plan buildings. Full-size mock-ups and prototypes are a very key part of everything that we do. And model making, technology, all these people together with one aim, which is to try and produce the best quality architecture that we can. And how we communicate it, the materials that we build. This is our materials research center. You see back into sketching, it's always there, ever present. Industrial designers working on elements of buildings, developing seating and prototypes for things. And then all the engineering that leads into construction, highly complicated things, the involvement of work on site, We very much like to stay with the project from the beginning to the end. So we have expertise, we have a whole department that actually looks at construction research. And then when the building's finished, more and more, we're very keen on post-occupancy. So we have a team, we've developed a team, bought the equipment, and they go to our projects and actually get our data. So what we designed, what we said we was going to achieve, we now actually have people there taking the measurements and proving, and we're finding immense knowledge in amongst that we can program back into projects. So that's a very brief little look in the window of what we are, and I'd just like to go through just some recent projects, some that are probably not in the exhibition upstairs, but things that have been completed in the last 6 months or so. This is at Yale. This is the School of Management at Yale. A very open, transparent building, trying to encourage the interrelationship between how a business community might work. Public spaces, private spaces, incorporating art on quite a major scale, and developing here some highly sort of specialised new teaching facilities where the staff and the students can interact in a much more direct way, and obviously all of the visual aids and visual communication can play a key part of that. A lot of research went into this, a lot of prototyping and mocking up to see if we could actually get this to be the best that we could. Again, meeting points. This is another project we did for Encana in Calgary, tall building, very different climate, extremely cold. I think I prefer it here where it's extremely hot. But nevertheless, we have to sort of look at how these things come together. And have a highly specialised company looking at kind of at oil exploration and a chance to sort of think about the public spaces of their building, as well as how they actually work as individual groups. So doing planting, landscaping spaces, art again incorporated at the lower floor. This is a very different project. This is a Lembach House Museum. It's an extension to a 19th century villa. It's in Munich. Munich is very Italian in the way that it actually presents its historic architecture. So this is a bright yellow building, the original villa. We've added this extension in a kind of very light bronze colour. A very different set of issues and parameters. Cultural buildings are a key part of what we like to become involved with. They're very public. Everybody can visit them. They're not private like offices or residential. So therefore they can have a greater impact for architecture onto individuals. This is natural light, still being used in conjunction with the galleries. They have a wonderful collection of the Blue Rider here. The world's best Kandinskis are all in this museum, as well as contemporary art through the galleries. And this is the original part of the building, which we've completely restored. And then another type of thing altogether. This is up in Glasgow. This is really a performance space for concerts, large-scale events such as this. And the section of the building with the seating and the auditorium space, with all the people arriving and moving around on the edges. This is what it's like on opening events. Again, a public building, a very different type of public building, but one where vast numbers of people can attend, and a huge performance space, great events. Rod Stewart was the first one to appear, and there's been many since. And really a building that becomes part of the landscape of this part of the city. An important thing, architectural contribution to the city, but nevertheless very crucial. And cities have a great fascination for us. This is our work that we've done in collaboration with Michel Devine, who's a very famous French landscape architect. And it's looking at the centre of Marseille. The picture in the top is what it was like before, and you can see all the traffic and all of the roads, literally, that were very hostile to people. And then how it's transformed at the bottom. Part of it, a tiny part of it, is this reflective canopy to provide shade for people and obviously amusement. And it becomes a focal point in this development, very dramatic. It's but you can be fun in architecture, you can do that, is allowed. But but nevertheless also fitting into a far more serious set of propositions about how one would revitalise the centre of what is a very tough, Marseille is a very tough city, and how we can bring about change there. This again on the top is what it was like before, and on the bottom what it's like now. Top and bottom, before and after. And then in another context again, this is in Abu Dhabi, which is a very long-running project, recently finally completed, this is retail, large retail space. And we do enjoy all the variety and richness of these different projects here. It's very much in an Arab culture. It's trying to not be international retail. It's trying to be something that would have a relevance in this culture. And, you know, we developed screens and technology such as this to be able to do that and work very closely with artists to be able to produce these kind of images. It would be wrong if we did those patterns. We found an expert who's written huge volumes on Islamic patterning and worked very closely with him and challenged him to try and do things in a more contemporary way. So you get this sort of continuation with the place, space and light, and really working with some interesting people along the way. It's environmentally trying to create the space that's appropriate. This roof opens through about 5 months of the year, and in the other time can be closed down. So we introduce natural airflow through here. It's trying to revive some of the qualities of the architecture of this region that have been lost because of the invention of air conditioning units, and actually go back and visit them and see how they could transform. Different again, this is a hotel in the middle of London, a very kind of exclusive hotel. The building was partly existing, partly modified. We created this very strong central atria space. This is reception, then you arrive. This is what it's like on the floors on the way to the rooms. This is on the top with fabulous views all over London. And the rooms, the bedroom suites inside. All different types and forms of architecture which we really enjoy. Again, in another context, this is Queen Alia Airport in Jordan, and a chance for us to find new ways of creating structure in this particular context and the climate. A lot of the project management for this came from Cyprus. The moulds for the concrete shells for this airport were made in Egypt and shipped to Jordan, where the shells were actually formed on site and then hoisted into place. And again, the preoccupation with natural light, top light into the space, really sort of giving a very dramatic quality and hopefully relying less on artificial lighting. Again, all part of the process. And then this is a very modest building. This is a modest little bit of Washington, D.C. It's not about big-scale architecture. It's about being very quiet. It's a city block. It forms squares and alleyways and streets, and itself is very modest, but actually, you know, creates a really powerful sense of place, a place that people can occupy in all sorts of different ways, as you can see here. It's not yet fully open, but soon will be. Projects that have evolved out of some of the techniques like 3D printing, the Moon project for the European Space Agency. How could we build a structure on the Moon? Working very closely with their engineers to think about that, and you realise there's a lot of moon dust. So if we send 3D printers and use the dust there, that might be an interesting way of doing it. The economy of sending stuff into space is enormous, obviously. So if you can actually use materials that you find, then that, you know, produced this study. We did this about 4 years ago, and it was all meant to be very top secret, and then they suddenly wanted to announce it, so that's why we can show it to you. 3D printing, the model of the 3D printed building on the Moon, which is a bit of things to get your head around. And of course, and on ongoing experimentation, we're doing a lot of work now trying to see how we can actually scale up that from, you know, a study into reality, printing pieces, you know, printing projects, and there are about 3 or 4 different strands of activity. A lot of the things that we do with research ties in with universities, with great specialists. We actually kind of bring those in as part of the team, part of that integrated thinking, and beginning to produce sort of new structures. And finally, this project that you might have heard of for Apple, it's the headquarters. This really is giving us a chance to look at a hardware integration and way beyond anything we've done so far. And the way that we're looking at this project is a huge headquarters for 16,000 people right in Cupertino, creating a huge park, putting all the cars underground or in parking structures, and trying to create some of the original landscaping that was in this part of California, using natural local trees and grasses to create a wonderful setting. And here's the overall master plan. And this photograph, which is where we've got to on site. There are already many components now stored in factories around the world waiting, but the work on site has only recently commenced, but you begin to see what's happening here. Thank you very much.